Welcome to the Warrior Gamer Headquarters podcast. It is my distinct honor to introduce this episode's guest.
My dad, again, the hardest man, the highest standards. Everything he uttered, he meant. He looked at me, he goes, Mike, if anything ever happens to your sisters, I'll break your back. All of the young kids that come into the Army today have some gaming experience. They're very comfortable in that space.
Where is the spectrum between really pushing hard, but pushing hard smartly so that you don't overdo it?
All of us, especially in the military, right? Because you get feedback all the time. The problem with a lot of people is they don't do anything with it, right? They think they know more than the person who's given the feedback. Yeah, I think you have to be around like-minded people. Share things with people who are more understanding because maybe they've dealt with it. There are probably 10,000 people out there. If you ask them who their mentor is, they'd say General Garrett, right? And that's because I never say no. I never walk by anybody. Well, again, thanks, Ken, Bilal, April, for having me on. I'm Mike Garrett. And, what's interesting is, what I've learned is that in this stage of my life, maybe my buddies will talk to Mike Garrett. Everybody else wants to talk to General Garrett. Um, and we can talk about that later on. But I'm Mike Garrett. I'm an Army brat. Grew up in a family of there were six of us, four kids, my mom and dad. My mother and father married young. I think my mom was 18, dad 21. And when I was about 3 years old, we moved from Cleveland to Fort Benning, Georgia. And my dad was in the Army for 35 years, the hardest man to this day. And I've known some hard men in my life. But the hardest man I've ever known is my father. Incredible human being. And again, I think, like we learn from most people, you learn as much from the good as you do from the bad, because he certainly wasn't perfect, but grew up with as the oldest, three younger sisters, and I remember my dad saying to me when I fully understood that everything he uttered, he meant. He looked at me, he goes, Mike, if anything ever happens to your sisters, I'll break your back. So guess what? Nothing ever happened to my sisters. But that's the kind of dad that I had. And there are a couple of things tonight that are important to me. Actually, three things that hopefully I'll get to say over and over again. One is, the audio and video in life have to match. And the one thing about my dad is, and even as I think about him now, now he's 84, almost 85 years old. He's got dementia. But even, he hasn't spoken to me in probably 3 or 4 years. But I saw him last weekend, and every time I see him, that look he gives me is, I'm going to slap the shit out of you. Because that's what I think he would say if he could still talk. But my dad, I tell you, there was never any space between what he said and what he did. And that's something that made a huge impression on me. The other thing that my father never did, he never walked past trash. And I didn't appreciate that until I was older. And I mean, literally and figuratively, right? I mean, he'd pick it up, but he also wouldn't walk past anything that he knew was wrong without saying something. And it took me a little bit longer in life to understand the importance of that. But that is the other thing. And then the third thing, and I learned this from my dad as well, and didn't appreciate it until much later in life, and that is the importance of my personal faith. Um, I priests love when I was talking to this Catholic school few weeks ago, and I always share this story. I'm Catholic, and my favorite thing about being Catholic is absolution, right? You go to confession and the priest absolves you of all of your sins. And I remember as a second grader, right, going to my first confession, because you had to do that before you made your first communion. And the priest going, I now absolve you of all your sins. And even as a second grade, and I'm 63 years old, and remember this, felt like the weight of the world was lifted off of my little second grade shoulders. And it's the same feeling that I get today, when I go to confession. But those are three things that I hope we get to talk about, as we go along. But growing up, as an Army kid, Fort Benning, Georgia, dad went to Vietnam a couple times. My dad, I would say my dad had a reputation. I already told you what I think of him. Other people would tell you that, he was mean. Nobody messed with Ed Garrett. Um, Officers that I got to meet, as I got older in the Army, all of them loved my father for the reasons that I just told you. I mean, if he said he was going to do something, he did it. He did everything to the highest standard, or in his words, it wasn't worth doing. And he was fiercely loyal to everybody. Three younger sisters, all a pain in the ass. Um, but the relationship that I have with him now, especially the one that takes care of my father, is very, very special and meaningful. Um, Nobody in the Garrett family, and this is not, I mean, this is an American thing, I think. But I'm a first generation college student, so I was the first Garrett to graduate from college. And I just barely graduated from college. I had to have a college degree to do what I really wanted to do in life, and that was to be in the Army. Um, and I never really thought about it, the importance of that. And then as I look back at, our family, all four of us graduated from college. My youngest sister was a PhD in psychology. And these were, a mom and a dad who both worked and valued education. We went to Catholic schools from kindergarten through college. But anyway, so I graduated from Xavier University in Cincinnati, and I say Cincinnati because, if you're black, if I say Xavier University to you, you are going to say Louisiana, right? Because there's an all black Catholic school, or primarily black Catholic school, an HBCU, Xavier in Louisiana. But I graduated from the other one in 1984. Um, Commissioned an infantry officer, did all the things infantry officers do. And my first assignment as a second lieutenant, my dad was my division command sergeant major. So this is Fort Stewart, Georgia, 24th Infantry Division. General Schwarzkopf was the division commander, and my dad was his sergeant major. Um, the battalion that I was in was a great outfit. The S3, the operations officer was a guy named Stan McChrystal. So I met Joe McChrystal when he was captain. Anyways, it was an interesting year. It was tough for a number of reasons. Like I said, my dad was very hard. I can remember one day, I had the day off, and I guess he didn't know about it. And I lived in the BOQs there on post, the Bachelor Officers Quarters, and he saw my car out there doing PT and knocked on my door. And he actually didn't knock on my door. I thought he was going to break the door down, wondering why wouldn't it work. It was painful, but the best thing he did for me was he got me an interview with the First Ranger Battalion commander, and I didn't know much about the Ranger Regiment, but I got an interview with then Colonel Keith Nightingale. And old Colonel Nightingale said, "Hey, Mike, we love your dad, takes great care of us, but if you come here, you got to do this on your own because you can't help you." And there are a lot of things that I'm proud of in terms of what I've done over the course of of my career, but I think one of the things that I'm very proud of, and it's actually very defining for me, I wore every Ranger scroll. I spent almost 10 years in the Ranger Regiment. And, that first 2 years in 1st Ranger Battalion as a lieutenant, I mean, think about this every day. And Bilal, I don't know what med school is like, but I would imagine it's similar. Think about going to work every day and the people that your peers, right? So all the other lieutenants are smarter, more fit, and some of them just better human beings than you are. And then you're in an environment um, that at that time was a pretty close to zero defect environment. I mean, they fired lieutenants every week, it seemed like. But I tell you what I learned there in terms of, leadership at that level, um, really carried me for the rest of my career. And then I did everything that everybody else did, right? I mean, I commanded several companies, commanded a Ranger rifle company. That was a highlight of my captaincy. As a major, I was a field grade out at 2nd Ranger Battalion. Then went out to Hawaii, commanded a battalion in the 82nd Airborne Division, commanded an airborne brigade in Alaska, deployed with that brigade to Iraq for 15 months. Um, that was a very interesting, defining 4 years of my life because that's what it was. That organization didn't exist. It was one of the units that they built for the surge in Iraq. And then, surprisingly to me, I had deferred the War College for 4 years. And when I finally got around to being able to go, I remember talking to the person who does the assignments and say, "Hey, look, don't screw this up." I said, I don't want to go anywhere but to Carlisle. I want to go to the Army War College. I want to play softball. I want to drink beer. I want to spend time with my family." And I never got to go to the War College. Again, unbeknownst to me, I'd already been selected for Brigadier General, and the Army leadership made the decision that I wouldn't go there. So they sent me to a think tank in Washington, D.C., which was a good experience. But then as a general, and I was a general for almost 14 years, 15 years, had a number of different jobs. Um, I enjoyed all of them. All of them had different challenges from recruiting command, uh, chief of staff of the 18th Airborne Corps, commanding United States Army Alaska, chief of staff at CENTCOM, United States Army Central, and then culminating, my service with a little over 3 years as the Forces commander. I couldn't have done any of that without my wife, but she's an amazing woman and amazing mom. I have 2 kids. I've got a daughter who has 3 girls, three, 2, and 1. And then my son, who's a captain in the Army, has a little boy, he and his wife. Um, After I retired, I kind of wondered what would I do, and there were a couple of opportunities um, that I was able to take advantage of right away, and they're good, but I'm still searching, to be honest with you, and that's one of the things that I picked up from watching your videos. I mean, you all are committed to this, or else you wouldn't be doing it. You are passionate, about this, and my problem is I'm passionate about everything, and I have a hard time saying no to people, and that's how Josh got me. Um, so that's for those of you who are more comfortable with General Michael Garrett. But yeah, that's Mike Garrett in a nutshell.
All right, Bilal. I would love for you to take the first crack at this because there are so much things that I can do, but I'm very familiar with his service. And
Yeah, I think I think the thing that stood out to me and everything that you discussed, so much of it centered around family, right? I often hear that a person's journey is brought about largely by their experiences and the people they've met along that journey, somewhere in the outside world. And yet, so much of your journey, despite having been in so many different places, starts at home. Why is that such an important point for you?
I don't know. I just know that, I told you I'm passionate about everything. Um, my dad and my mother. I didn't talk much about my mom. My mom died way too young, but I think I'm a good mix of both my mom and dad. I mean, my mother was the most caring, most wonderful, and I was her only boy, kind of thing, and her oldest child. But my dad, he saw in me, I think, at an early age, things that I didn't realize until I was much older. Um, and unlike today, where, my wife and my daughter probably speak multiple times a day, um, I never, my dad and I didn't talk all that often. I mean, I would try to remember to call, once a week, and it was more so for my mother, than my dad. But I think, like most sons, the big task in life is to make your father proud. And I could die tomorrow and feel good about at least knowing that I checked that block. Because my dad, again, the hardest man with the highest standards, that I've ever known. I mean, I know my dad is proud of his son, and I guess in some weird way, that means a whole lot to me.
Hmm.
all right, April. Yeah, I
Oh,
do think that
thank
that's like
you.
imbibed in sons. That's just like you got to make your
Absolutely.
proud. So.
And
Yeah.
you started with your speaking your story by talking about your father. And I think that for particularly for African American families, there's a, that's a really, really fantastic sort of thing to have that bond and that connection, even if it was the hardest man. My mom was a Marine who joined in 65, so I need say no more. She tried, but I think I would ask, you know we deal with mental health here a lot and giving people advice on how to deal with mental health. And a lot of folks right now, particularly folks who are in that middle age where you're at, are dealing with very young kids, grandkids, and parents with dementia. One of my employees right now is trying to work through that. Can I ask if it's too personal, just tell me so. But can I ask how you digested dealing with dementia and how your family pulled together it sounds like you've got a plan and are making it happen.
Yeah, April. We'll talk a little bit about faith later, but perspective is very important, for me. Um, and I tell you, and I was telling Josh, this has really been a very tough year personally, for me. Both of my children have had, mental health challenges. Um, my dad, it's just sad, I mean, to see this really, really hard man. And that's why I said what I said earlier, when I see him now, and he looks at me and I'm thinking about what he would say. Um, the perspective part, though, for me, April, and what helps me is that one, I am eternally grateful and thankful that my sister Stephanie, was at a point in life where she could stop what she was doing and take care of my dad. Because the family meeting was, you know, it was two sisters. One sister passed away several years ago. So the two sisters and I, and at that time, I think I was a three-star general. I spent 75% of my time in the Middle East, and I basically said, "Hey, I can't do anything." My dad didn't need any money or anything, and I said, "Hey, my vote is let's find a decent facility and put them in there." And my youngest sister, she was at not the same point, but she's like, "Yeah, that's probably I can't personally take dad on." But the middle sister, she goes, "You know what?" She goes, "Nope, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna take care of him." And it's been a really neat journey because she's 6 years into this, and it's been a neat journey, for her. Um, I think when I think about my father, and this is something that when I go to confession now, it's kind of one of my stock sins, right? I feel like I should be doing more, but there's really not a whole bunch more, that can be done. And I told my sister, I said, "Hey, look," I said, "Here are my red lines. I'm not changing diapers because my dad wouldn't want me to do that." And but I will tell you, this has been a really, really, really tough year. And in the Army, we didn't have, suicides. They may have happened, but early in my career, I don't remember. And when I say early, I'm talking the first 15, 16 years in the military. I don't even know that we categorized any of the challenges that we had as behavioral health. I just don't remember even talking about behavioral health until we went to war, as an army and as a nation. Um, and like a lot of my peers, it took me a while to really get my head around, mental health challenges. And if, I gave you a little bit of sense of my background, with my father, with the Ranger Regiment, and these are just hard men. And it doesn't matter, what's going on in your life, you just suck it up and, you do whatever you have to do to accomplish, the mission. And then as I got more senior, I was in positions to where we were recommending and in some cases making policy on how we would treat, as an institution, mental illness. And it was personal, but I tell you what, um, when your children are struggling, it's a whole different, and I feel bad about that, right? Because, I was responsible for, most of the Army. And I don't think I had the same emotional response to, the things that we were dealing with as an Army and as I dealt with as a commander, as I did with my own kids. Um, and that's something that, even today I think about. And when I talk to, senior officers and leaders, I share that with them, right? Because, um, but anyways, the perspective is helpful, is important. And then the last thing I will tell you, I pray all the time, right? So, I don't have, the exercises that Jim Poole was talking about. But what I do have is I will say the hell out of the rosary, and somebody asked me, goes, "So what does it do for you?" And I said, well, one, I think it buys me time, right? It takes my mind away. It puts me in, a spiritual space, which is helpful for me. But it buys me more time, right? Which is what I found is important.
Thank you so much. That's going to be helpful for so many.
All right. So it's a lot to unpack. I like it. A lot of nuggets there. And I think you're one of the only guests who are on the opposite side of the spectrum of having made policy enforced standards upon folks that may have had mental and behavioral health issues. I do remember the surge where the Army lowered standards to an unprecedented rate or level, rather. And I do remember, because I did serve from 99 to just last year. I mean, the force changed with Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm very interested in, we've had a lot of people on the show, and we have thousands of followers who are all advocates, many of them subjected to mental health and behavioral health issues. So please tell me a little bit, step into that, where now you're on the other side, you're with Warrior Gamer, and you're also joining Alana. How has your perspective changed on behavioral health and mental health issues from when you were a general enforcing standards to now on the other side as Mike?
I don't think they've changed, Ken. I mean, I think I grew, over time, probably, I don't know, as a lieutenant colonel, battalion commander, through the rest of my career. I think I gained an appreciation for, the challenges, that we had. We were starting to talk more openly about behavioral health and mental health issues. We were starting, I remember at the very beginning of the suicide um, epidemic. I don't know what the right medical term is, Bilal, epidemic, pandemic. But I do know that, we change as a culture, right? I mean, I'm Catholic, and in 2000 as a battalion commander, the thoughts that I would have, it was a sin, right? I mean, it was a sin, according to the Catholic Church. Well, not only did, Mike Garrett, kind of change as he understood more, so did society, so did the Catholic Church. Um, and I think the big difference, for me was it was never, and again, perspective is important. I have friends, and I've gone back to several of them and apologized because they've dealt with this their whole lives. I mean, they had kids who had behavioral health issues that they had to deal with, and I certainly wasn't as maybe caring. I don't think caring is the right word. I don't think I was as empathetic, as I probably could have been or would have been had I known more. But I think um, as a military, we all grew to appreciate, the problem for what it was. Um, but I don't know that anybody could predict, that we would be where we are today. Um, I don't know. Maybe some mathematician, could see the exponential growth and impact of this over time. Maybe, and maybe there were people, analysts, that were doing this. Um, we always thought that, and the Army leadership, and this is at different echelons as I continue to progress, we always thought that there was an answer, right? But the problem with the Army, specifically, is has always been a challenge with scale. The Army is so big, and there were pockets of excellence out there. Our special operations units, especially our high-end special operations units, early on, identified a problem, invested in, the people, the material, um, and the resources, to understand it and get after it. And the Army tried to do the same thing, but it's one thing when you're talking about, the National Mission Force. It's another thing when you're talking about, the other 1 million, soldiers, out there. And so I my personal journey and understanding, and again, it goes back to perspective. I thought we were doing all the right things. I was genuinely not just concerned, but my job, especially my last job, was all about the readiness of our Army, and I certainly saw the impact of our behavioral health challenges on Army readiness, our ability to meet, our global requirements, and that's kind of where my focus was. Um, but I'll tell you, it really wasn't until, and now I'm out of the Army, right? Um, Now I'm just, a big cheerleader and advocate, for the military. But when my children started to have, behavioral health issues, and I'm talking fairly serious behavioral health issues, I felt, and this is, there are a number of things you can go and look and see some of the things that I've said. And one of the things, I hate hypocrites. I absolutely hate hypocrites, right? But boy, did I feel like a big hypocrite, in some ways, as I thought about how I felt about my kids and what they were going through. Unlike my wife, as we were going through this, I understood that the Army is a big machine, and that, we are never, ever going to be able to meet the requirements, to the standard that we want. Um, Again, I think this is just Garrett because of the scale of the issue. But I tell you what, it was a challenge, an incredible learning opportunity for me, and I don't know if that had anything to do with me, coming on with Josh. I mean, I told you I can't say no. The nonprofits that I am involved with today. I'm on the board of Simplifying America's Fund, which is odd because that sounds very marine, and it is. But Joe Dunford called me shortly after I retired and said, "Hey, Mike, we need you." And I love Joe Dunford. He's one of the finest human beings I've ever met. And I said, "Sir, anything for you? But boy, this is going to be a tough one, right? This is the first thing I'm doing after retiring from the Army is, but the good thing about that is they treat, as many soldiers as anybody else. They needed an Army guy, and it is a world-class, nonprofit. I mean, it's just an incredible organization. There are a couple of other organizations in the state of North Carolina that I am loosely aligned with. But what I really want to do now is, and we're trying to do this in North Carolina with an organization that connects, one, inventories, assesses, connects all of the veteran nonprofits and look for, gaps in service, maybe redundant, activity so that we can service more people, be a little bit more focused in what we do. Because as I, look at the landscape, there are tons of organizations. This is one of them that are doing everything they can to impact one of the most important populations of people in our country. Um, but it's a whole bunch of organizations, different efforts. And so, at least here in North Carolina, we're trying um, to get a little bit more focused, I guess.
All right, so I have a question. Do you game? And if not, when will you start gaming? Because you're on the show now. And if you do, what games do you play?
Let's see. So when my son got, when my wife finally bought him Call of Duty and whatever machine, that thing got played on. I remember the first time I played with him, I got sick. I got nauseous, and so I got turned off and never really went back to it. So I am not a gamer. Um, and I've learned a lot about it over the last couple of years. My next door neighbor, retired, really wonderful people, retired guy. His son is a professional gamer, and I mean, he makes just listening to his mom and dad is very, 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 successful, which I thought was interesting. I mean, I didn't have a clue, and I probably shouldn't be mentioning this on the show, but I didn't have a clue that people were making a living, gaming. Um, but I certainly do now. But what I will tell you is that our soldiers, my soldiers, it's one of their favorite pastimes. And so, as the Army, got smarter, instead of buying, footballs, basketballs, volleyballs, and put in the MWR kits, they start spending money on Nintendos and PlayStations, and because that's what, our younger soldiers, that's what they wanted.
Yeah, Al Udeed has the one of the biggest gaming centers
Yeah.
like in the United States or owned, by Americans. So,
Well,
uh,
that's an Air Force thing, though.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Well,
my favorite
no.
part about gaming and the military is that connection for folks who are overseas who don't get to see their kids, but they can play with their kids. And
That's right.
Ken's got a fantastic story about three generations playing together.
Yep, yep. My dad, me, and my son played, and that's three. And then we got four generations just over the summer, which is pretty cool, all gaming. So, but you did do war games and exercises, which
Yeah.
is very, very, very similar. But when you play at the gaming level, the graphics are way better. It's real time, and there is a lot of if you make a tiny mistake, the effects can be devastating. And we're seeing a lot more of gaming gamification in the Department of
Yeah.
Defense as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, we've been at this for probably, I don't know, 25 years. Um, I remember, I mean, this is how old I am. When I was a lieutenant in First Ranger Battalion, when we were on recall, everybody carried pocket full of quarters because, every hour you had to call in. There were no cell phones. When I went back, we had beepers. That was, and then, I think as a major, we had cell phones. I remember when, we got our first computers in the military, and but what I've seen over the evolution that I've seen over time, and I'm a big Moore's law, guy, and I've paid close attention to technology. It's just something that I'm interested in. And again, the Army, I think, has done a decent job of adapting technology, but our challenge, again, has always been scale, right? I remember, we came up with this system that, you had a monocle hooked to your radio. You had a local area network with your platoon or company. You could see every person. You could see where every person was. Good terrain graphics and all this other stuff. And we were testing it. And my feedback to the Army was, I said, "Hey, look, it's not perfect." I said, "But we should buy this now and put it in the hands of our soldiers, and we'll figure it out." Well, we never bought it. Your special operations units used it. And again, it went back to, the challenge cost of scaling it, for the rest of the Army. But, young kids today and where we are today, I mean, think about this, the Army, the approach to UAVs, drones at the battalion level and below is to allow units, so give units money and allow units to go out and buy whatever they want. And you can do that because all of the young kids that come into the Army today have some gaming experience. They're very comfortable in that space, and it's intuitive, for them. And that's really where we're going, I think, with, and we're going to get there faster than I thought we would, just based on, the rate of technological, change. Um, so, yeah.
That's
All right.
fantastic.
What do you got, April? Got something?
Yeah, so in addition to your dad, you mentioned your faith multiple times, and I was wondering at what age did that develop? Did the military increase that, or was that something that was always with you? I love that you said that you say the hell out of the rosary.
Yeah. Well, look, I am hoping, my hope is purgatory, because at least I'm on the right track. Then, I might be there for a while, but that's all right. Yeah, my faith has always been important. I told you, I remember as a second grader, right? We went to Catholic school from kindergarten through college. I went to a Catholic university. The dorm I lived in was 100 meters from church, and I think I went to mass maybe twice, while I was at that school. So I think I've always been religious, but it wasn't until, I made a personal decision. It was something that was missing from my life, probably when I was maybe a lieutenant, captain. Maybe it was before I got married, because it's been a big part of, my wife and I, a big part of our lives. But the one thing, April, for me, I told you, audio and video have to match, and I hate hypocrites. And so all I've ever tried to do was to provide a good example, to be a good example, um, you know, and, live my faith. Um, I pray, like I said, I pray all the time. And, the Army, every unit has a chaplain, right? When I was a brigade commander, I had 7 chaplains. And I told the Army, I asked the Army, I said, hey, look, I said, one of these guys needs to be a priest, when we deploy. Um, so, yeah, my faith has always been, a big part of my life. And, this audio video thing has always been important. This hypocrisy has always been important. And, not walking past, things that I know are wrong, has always been important. And, like I said, when I have nowhere else to go, I mean, when I've been, deep in despair, the one place that I could always go to was to God. And the one thing that I could always do, was pray. Um, I remember telling, my wife, as a brigade commander in Iraq, we'd have our memorial services, and, the fob that I was on was a popular target for the local insurgency. And so we had it out in the middle of nowhere, big concrete walls. And, I would sit there as we would memorialize these incredible young men and women. And I would hold it together the whole ceremony. And we always did them at night. But on the way back, and it was probably, maybe a mile back to my office, I would cry like a baby all the way back to my office. Because nobody could see me. And but I would also though pray, for the family, for the soldier and for me, right? So yeah, faith has always been important to me and something that I've always been proud of. I've never pushed my faith on anybody, but I've never shied away from the importance of my faith either.
That's great. So I have a question too. So I actually worked at CENTCOM when you were the chief of staff, and I do remember I actually interacted with you a few times as a captain and then later major. And we had some issues with like some of the staff talking, and then technology emerging, and like I was trying to launch Google Earth, which
Yep.
is very gamified kind of
Yep.
experience. And I just remember like you coming in and just going, look, we got to make this happen. He's the only guy that can do it. He's gonna do it, and that's just the way it is. I I really liked how squared away that you were, and like how clear-headed you were. And um, I'm interested to know for folks that are watching, like, where is the spectrum between um, like really pushing hard, but pushing hard smartly so that you don't overdo it? Because I don't think that you've like done too much, right? Like I don't think that you went off the deep end or had any issues like that, and that you seem to be very well put together. Can you help some folks that might be struggling or that might be raising children as well, that they can help um, gain a little bit of that knowledge that you have?
Yeah, Ken. Yeah, so when I was battalion commander in the 82nd, I invited my dad. He'd been retired for a number of years at that point, but we were having our big battalion ball, and I invited my dad to be our guest speaker. And so he came up and spent a couple of days with us. And, one evening he looked at me, he goes, Mike, when did you get to be so perfect? And I was like, man, uh, and I really, and that's how he said it, right? He just, and I really thought about it, because I am driven. I mean, I care deeply about people. There's nothing more important than people in the Army. And I care deeply, about everybody, but I'm also pretty hard in terms of, standards and folks meeting the standards and, working, to attain them. And so that was the first thing, that I learned. And I remember, General McChrystal, he was a one-star at the time, and he came to one of our training meetings, and he didn't stay for the whole thing, but he left me a little note. And I had that note for many years. It's probably still around here somewhere, but it said, Mike, good meeting, but I was surprised um, how little input you took from your folks. And I was like, oh man. Because I'm thinking that I'm receiving. So I guess the point is, all of us, everybody, especially in the military, right? Because you get feedback all the time. The problem with a lot of people is they don't do anything with it, right? They think they know more than the person who's given the feedback, and um, I've always appreciated feedback, and especially from people that I know care about me, and care about our Army and care about our people. And so I think that's the one thing that has been helpful for me. But I don't think I was always that way. When I got to CENTCOM, I'm, I was two-star general. I'd commanded, at the two-star level, and that place was, just a beehive of activity. And I mean, it was all serious, significant. I mean, every day there, as you remember, Ken, I mean, we were at war. They're still at war.
Yeah.
And so I didn't, my job there was to, one, understand what General Austin at the time make sure I understood what he wanted. And then it was to communicate it and to resource the staff to do it. And I've always been one of those guys that if I see talent and I have an eye for talent, um, I resource them. I don't let people get in the way. And that was probably the case, with you, there at Centcom. And when I think about, all of the very successful, or most of the successful people that I've seen in the Army and in the military, they took the same approach, right? Where it was about developing people, it was about encouraging people, it was about providing real feedback. Um, I remember as a battalion commander, I had a lieutenant. There were 30 lieutenants in this battalion, and I counted them all. And I remember this one lieutenant, he comes in and I go, all right, man, you're number 28. And he goes, out of 30? I said, yep. And he goes, sir, with all due respect, I'm calling bullshit on that. And so we talked about it, and he and I agreed that there were 15 people that were 1 to 15. And then I told him, I said, you know what? I said, after that, it really doesn't matter. And I said, the biggest thing you should take from this conversation is, if you want to have a future in the Army, it's not going to be as an infantryman. And guess what? That guy he may be a brigadier general right now. He's an operational research systems analyst, big Orsa guy. And it was the right thing for him, right? So, again, I think providing honest feedback is important. And it's actually something that I see that are not necessarily senior leaders, but our leaders are a little bit more challenged with today than I remember.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that too. And I've had that conversation at one point and be on both sides of that. So this is great. So we're approaching time.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask one
Bilal,
more
April.
question?
Yep, rock and roll.
So Ken is the most decorated athlete in military history. You guys from the military are, your discipline is in your blood, wakes up at 4 a.m. What advice do you have for folks who are not there? For folks who are are coming out of mental issues, are coming out of, the stress of getting out of the military and not having that structure anymore. What advice do you have for people who want to sort of regain that feeling of joy, of excitement, of purpose?
Yeah, I think you have to be around like-minded people. I mean, and that's what you all do, right? You provide an environment. I mean, it's your mission, right? It's your mission, and you all do it through gaming, but it's to bring people together, to allow them to be with people of their ilk, allow them to share things with people who are more understanding because maybe they've dealt with it. And so that's I think the one thing to provide an environment that people are comfortable in. The other thing for me though is it really does go back to April what you said. It's all about being disciplined. And even for me today, I mean, I still get up, I still work out. I still do a lot of things for my physical and mental health that are important to me. The other thing I do is I have about four friends, but I have one very, very close friend. He and I retired about the same time, and we talk every day and we share everything, right? I mean, because this transition, I don't care if you, like my son, is going to get out of the Army and he wants to be a PA. Um, I don't care if you're a captain, a sergeant, or a four-star general. Transition is tough, and you need somebody to go through it with you. And I'm not talking about your wife or your spouse. You need a friend, and I tell you, Paul Funk and I mean, it's everything from relationship with your spouse now that you're just Mike and not General Garrett. I mean, life changes, and so that's the other thing. I think everybody needs somebody, somebody that they can share everything with. I mean, the challenges I told you, I've had some significant personal challenges, but there were several people that I could share everything with, right? And so that's really what I would tell folks. Find somebody. And if you can't find somebody, call me, right? I mean, there are probably 10,000 people out there. If you ask them who their mentor is, they'd say, they wouldn't say Mike, but they'd say General Garrett, right? And that's because I never say no. I never walk by anybody. And when somebody, and even now, people call me, I get 10 calls a week asking for letters of recommendation. Yeah, but you know what? I never say no. I never say no. That's, it is a blessing and a privilege for me to have reached a point to where I can help people. And so the people that are on this, that listen to this, I don't care if you know me or not. I mean, if you need help with something, call Mike Garrett, right? And I'll stop what I'm doing for you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. That must be what you're most proud of, that attitude.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm again. I told you I can die knowing that my dad's proud of me. Um, I think I'm probably not going to go straight to heaven. That's okay. But I've tried to live a decent life. My wife and I, again, marriage is tough, and we're 35 or 36 years into this thing. And but you know what? Well, she says I'm gonna die in this house. She doesn't say she's gonna die in this house. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Um, but I'm proud of just being Mike Garrett. Um, raising two wonderful children. Being married and in love with my wife, and having friends. And now, looking for, the right platform, the right places to make a difference.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. This has been amazing.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Ken, where are you now? You said you're in DC?
No, I was, but I left DC to go to Michigan, and so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
here. Yep,
All right. All right. So you're in the Eastern Standard Time Zone?
I am, and I
Oh,
have
so
four
you got to
seasons.
get going.
Yeah, I know. But hey, I know you spent a lot of time in the desert. Me too. Did a lot of hot assignments. This is the first time I've had 4 seasons in my life, so I'm
Yeah, that's
I'm living
good.
life.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good.
I want to say thank you very much, and I think that your tone and your approach and your attitude was more of communication than many of the words. And I do think that you're a great guy. I think a lot of people can see that, and I really appreciate your time and your service. 14 years as a general, man, that's impressive. And you got to be well put together in order to endure that. And you have a great career. You have a lot of results. And I love that you've taken a step back and you're examining things for your next step. And I'm glad that you're with us.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the luck and skill. And we will stay in contact because I'm going to take you up on that offer.
All right. Thanks, Ken. Thanks,
All
Ken.
right. And that's Warrior Headquarters Podcast out.